Good afternoon, team. We're going to, I guess, start at least on our chapter 8 when we're talking about leadership and organizations. But again, like I usually do, before we start on chapter 8, we're going to go back and touch some of the high points in chapter 7. And as we went through chapter 7, and as I'm sitting here thinking about how to review chapter 7 and reading some of the information in chapter 8, and then, I've already, got some ideas on chapter 9. And it's just, I don't know. I'm glad, I guess from my perspective, I'm glad that I'm kind of in the twilight of my career on the downhill slide, whatever you want to, for how you want to phrase it, when it comes to leading groups of individuals. It used to be when I started out in a leadership capacity, it was very enjoyable, helping individuals achieve the goals that they had set for themselves, helping, build teams and driving the goals forward that we had for the organization. And, it was a very pleasurable teaching, learning process. Spent a lot of time maximizing human capital, helping leaders develop their human capital, even helping those individuals that had no desire to lead to develop their human capital and be, contributors and great followers. And I don't know, it's just changed over the last, I started noticing the change 15, 16, 17, maybe into 2018. It's just, things are changed, especially with, and I'll term them the less experienced teams, individuals right out of a, university, college, they've got a degree, they think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. They're going to hit the ground running, change the world. They've been taught along the way that promotion is where it's at, and up that corporate ladder, and they're not willing to spend time learning the trade or learning the skills that they need. And over the last few years, I found that I spent probably 80% of the time with 20% of the followers on any given team, because they tend to be the alienated ones. They're, you're not promoting me fast enough. I'm great. And they end up, kind of gravitating to that out group. So you spend all your time, and they talk about in the text, one bad apple. It seemed like I spent most of my time trying to manage those bad apples and trying to get them to a situation or a level where they were productive. So again, I'm glad I'm on the downhill slide of my management career, leadership career. I'm into the consulting mode now, and then we'll get into some of the aspects of consulting and managing teams. But it's a different management style. It's a different management ask of a consultant than it is for supervisor, manager, director, VP, even in the senior management teams. It's just a completely different ask. And I don't know, especially you to me, you tack all of that on with the individuals coming out of college now and their expectations, and you're overlaid with issues we had with COVID in 2021, even into 22, and it's just the expectations, the remote individuals, work from home, again, it all goes back to expectations. So again, I'm glad I'm on my downhill slide, but this text offers some extremely helpful concepts along the way to help navigate some of these issues. And hopefully that as you go through this text and these videos that I put together for you, that it brings to light some of the things that maybe would be extremely helpful for you going forward, and you can put in your toolbox and kind of work through that. But again, we're spend a few minutes talking about reviewing chapter 7. And chapter 7 was focused on feedback. It was focused on seeking feedback, receiving feedback, and giving feedback. And you ended up with that they kind of worked through this leader orientation on feedback, and you had the avoidance, you had the performance prove, and you had the learning. And over the years, I have, been involved in mentoring, motivating, managing all of these types of individuals as they're trying to climb that corporate ladder. And especially individuals that lack the patience to develop the skill set or lack the patience to develop that expertise and to learn how the proper approach or the proper strategy to managing, especially at the lower levels where they're managing. A lot of them do fall into that avoidant and that performance prove kind of category. But as they get older and as they gain more experience, they do. You start to see them making that shift. Even though those aren't necessarily stages that you work through, you see them kind of starting to shift and lean more toward the leader orientation that kind of falls in that learning category. And when it comes to receiving feedback, the text, or at least the authors in the text, they talked about listening actively. They talked about learn more, speak less. They talked about avoid quick judgments. And the quick judgments, I've been in a lot of coaching sessions, a lot of sessions where I'm providing feedback on an evaluation on an individual, and that individuals can get defensive really quickly. And as I've talked about on numerous occasions here, that I found that the easiest way to kind of preempt all of that is to start out with some positive comments and then work into some opportunities for improvement. And it seems to go a little better. But to me, the basis for a very worthwhile evaluation, a very worthwhile coaching session, is to have definitive goals. And I've always liked the meets, the exceeds, the kind of the stretch goals. And I like to have them tied back to discernible, definitive, black and white. Some people call them binary type metrics. Either you've hit your metric or you haven't. It's not difficult to do those calculations. And as long as it's driven by accurate, relevant data, it's really hard for somebody to argue with it. Now, they will always have excuses. And, well, I didn't get to do this and I didn't get to do that. And, this was IT's fault. And, network management wouldn't work with me. And, somebody down the hall, grabbed my papers off. I mean, I have heard such a diverse array of excuses. Probably need to sit down and write a book about it at some point, because I've had some really humdingers along the way as far as excuses. And then they talk about the communication media, and then they jump into kind of the judgments and the attributions, and they talk about the external factors, they talk about the internal factors of attributions. And then they talk about the fundamental attribution error, where we spend more time talking about the internal factors than maybe we do on the external factors, because especially in this day and age, with as much that's going on in the world, and with inflation and the issues in the Middle East, and just it's I don't know, that there are a lot of external factors that are pulling and pushing and with all of your team. So just be careful that you don't short sell that external factor. And then they spend a few minutes talking about one-on-one coaching, and they talk about the goals and the data and how important it is to identify those gaps and to have the data and the information structured in such a way that not only identify the gaps, but so you and then the individual that you're providing the feedback to can sit down and work through some strategies on how to eliminate those gaps, or at least mitigate the gaps. You may never eliminate them, but at least mitigate them and give them a higher probability of meeting their goals. And the last thing they really talk about is providing feedback, and you want a verbal acknowledgement that everybody's on the same page. You've provided the feedback, the individual receiving it understands the feedback, you've got some steps outlined. You've got some again, coaching steps and a coaching timeline. And, here's the parameters we need to meet. Here's maybe weekly parameters and monthly and quarterly parameters. Because you as a leader, you're trying to help these individuals to not only improve and develop as leaders themselves, but the more you can help improve them, whether it's one of your subordinate leaders or just one of the individual contributors on your team, the more you can improve their human capital, the better or the higher the probability that they're going to help the organization reach their goals. And then lastly, they talked about 360 feedback. And I've been in organizations that have used it a lot. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. If you're in an organization that uses it, as far as I'm concerned, good luck. But anyway, we've kind of wrapped up chapter 7, and now we're going to talk about chapter 8, and we're going to talk about team and shared leadership. And the text, the authors start out and they talk about leadership. It's all about influencing people toward common goals or visions. Maybe your goals or visions. It may be the goals or visions that have been handed down to you from somebody in senior management. Maybe the goal and vision that's been developed in a back room by the board of directors and the senior management of the organization that you work for. And it's one of these top-down kind of rolling goals and metrics. And it's like the CEO, comes out of the boardroom and he's got like this, 15 goals he wants everybody in the corporation to achieve. And sometimes you're scratching your head, it's especially with me. As an economist, I question everything. And so it's, sometimes you're scratching your head and you're thinking, who in the world ever developed that goal? Why would they have that as a goal? It makes no sense whatsoever. But again, it came down from the board, came down from the CEO, and whether you like it or not, you're there to manage that goal. And when you're a leader, you're typically managing either individuals one-on-one, or you could be managing your team. And I've I'm trying to always manage them together because I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. So I'm managing one-on-one kind of on a daily basis, but I'm having monthly meetings with the entire team to say, okay, here's where we are, or here's where the goals are, here's where we stand with the goals, here's what we think the expectation at the end of the year is going to be, and here's some gaps we've got to mitigate, or here's some gaps we've got to fill in, or we're never going to make our goal. So again, it's communication and wanting everybody to be on the same page. And the text gives the text, at least the authors, and again, sometimes they're academics, and sometimes they're made from a operational perspective. They make it a little far afield, but they give you a definition of a group, and they say it's a collection of individuals performing similar tasks, and that when added together will help further the overall goals of the group. Makes sense. You have groups and clubs in high school. When you went to college, you had groups and clubs. Maybe you're on a fraternity or sorority and you have groups and clubs and you're all doing things like that. You get out of college and you may be active in your church. You may be active in the Rotary Club, the Lions Club. There are a lot, maybe you join the Masons. I mean, there are a lot of clubs. Once you get out of college, you get into the workforce that you can join. Maybe you're active in your alumni association at the university that you attended. But at the end of the day, it's just a group of individuals that come together and, they loosely trying to work in one direction to try to get some overall goals accomplished of the group. And then they flip that and they talk about, their definition of a team. And it's a collection of individuals who work collaboratively and cooperatively to achieve commonly held goals or vision. And they throw a couple of more things in there that says it's formed as an ongoing or formed for a specific task or project. Geographic proximity versus geographically dispersed. And I've been on all phases of that. Typically, most people think as a team, they think as a sports team or they think as a work team. As a consultant, Now I'm managing teams, but they are specific projects. Go into an organization and I'm helping them achieve certain goals. And depending on whether the organization is global, national, regional, could be in a very small, local market. You're talking about, either geographic proximity or it could be geographically dispersed. But again, as a consultant, you're typically focused on a single project, and you're usually you've got individuals coming from maybe different areas in the company, maybe different functional units in a company, but they're coming together because their expertise and a lot of the teams that I worked with as a consultant, they're short term, maybe a 90-day team. Maybe they've asked me to come in and put together a team to help secure a grant. Maybe it's a federal, maybe it's a state grant that they're trying to secure monies for, and come in and try to help them build the team, put together the strategy, the presentation. And once it's done, then I'm done and I move on to the next thing. A little different than when I worked at, I'll just throw Health Net out there. Health Net was basically a West Coast health plan. But on the commercial side, it was West Coast. But when you looked at the government specialty side, did a lot of work in TRICARE, did a lot of work in VA, and we were constantly bidding on government contracts. And not only did I have the leadership responsibilities, and at that point I was doing either network management, medical informatics, medical economics, either building networks or doing analytical type work. So I had those teams that I managed on a daily basis, but a lot of us in the organization would be pulled off and set aside. And Health Net's government specialty division was located in Sacramento, actually out toward Folsom, so out east of Sacramento. And they had a big office out there that they would pull us all in. And sometimes there were a couple of the projects that worked for, we worked on it as a management team and pulling expertise together. We had a couple that lasted a year and a half. So were really long term, but as soon as the government contract was secured, then the groups were disbanded and you went back. Even though you were doing your even though you did your day job, at the same time you were involved in these special projects, then you kind of went back to your day jobs and you do your day jobs, and maybe you were helping to operationalize or execute on these government contracts. But short-term, long-term, still managing people, and still as a leader, you were expected to help motivate and mentor and help build human capital at the same time that you were trying to secure these government contracts. And if you look at the text, they talk about leader responsibility. You try to develop a cohesive team, but one that adapts to changes. You're grabbing individuals from diverse backgrounds, and you've got different motivations. They've got different abilities, and you're trying to bring all of this. And I'll call it diversity, and I guess in a sense it is diversity, but it was a diverse group of individuals with different capabilities that you were trying to mold into a cohesive team to ensure that you could secure these government contracts. And you're always having to deal with, conflicts, disagreements. It was like a never-ending process trying to, like kind of herding cats. I mean, you couldn't keep them all headed in the same direction. But as a leader, you're responsible for ensuring that the team's needs are met. You want to give them a clear direction. You want a task-oriented direction, depending on what kind of a timeline. Again, we talked about time frames in one of the earlier chapters. You want to be supportive. You want to be relations-oriented. To ensure that needs are recognized. And you want to be a change-oriented type of leader, because especially on these short-term projects, or especially on these government contracts, those things can change like in a heartbeat. The requirements, the government, it's the government can't make up their mind on anything. So they're constantly changing the requirements on these government contracts. And so you have to be kind of a change-oriented individual, or you're never going to make it in these government contracts. And the chapter that we're dealing with in Chapter 8, it deals with the key elements and factors defining team leadership. It deals with leadership and stages of team development. Makes sense. And it deals with the role of shared leadership. So that's kind of how we're going to kind of ease down through the chapter as we go through it. And the basic elements of team leadership, you want to, and it's really difficult, especially if you're bringing individuals together for these short-term projects. There's an avoidance of the out-group relationships. If an effective team can be formed without out-group individuals, it is the best case scenario. I can honestly say I've never been able, depending on who is picking the team, to end up with, especially on these bidding on these government contracts. If it's a team I'm selected myself and managing on a day-to-day, that's one thing. I was always able to handle the out-group issues. But it's when you're working on these special teams, and even as a consultant, you're grabbing individuals in different areas in the company, and it's just like this out-group impact. I don't know. You can't avoid it. And as a leader, you have to do the best job you can in trying to manage it. In reality, again, they say out-group membership can cause issues for the leader. Team members have issues of fairness. And they talk about, the issue with the free rider. And that's when they go into the one bad apple. It spreads issues with the team leader among the group. So if there is any opportunity to either avoid the out of group, or if you see it starting to impact you, to nip it in the bud right then, you need to take those steps, because otherwise you're not going to have a unified team. And when it comes to the basic elements of team leadership, you want to make sure there's shared values. You want to make sure the goals and visions, everybody's on the team, everybody understands what the goals, visions, values are, and everybody's buying into it. Everyone's on the same page. There's a shared sense of the values, goals, and visions. As a leader, to ensure that, you need to be leading by example. And we've talked about that in the past. They talk about walk the talk. And especially in team meetings. But you also, as we've talked about in some of the earlier chapters, you want to know when you can relinquish power, when you can provide some autonomy on these teams. And that's almost some of that. Even though you can use information and data to get you there, a lot of it's kind of a gut feel, just kind of watching the team dynamics and trying to figure out, okay, this team I can turn loose to run with it. I think they've got the expertise they need. Or here's another team over here that they're just, if I don't stay right with them, they're never going to make it. You want to be able to reward and set behavior goals. They talk in the text about inconsistencies impact a cohesive, effective team, and they certainly do. You need to be consistent on your strategy. You need to be consistent on how you deal with people. You want to make sure that the perception of fairness is there, because there's nothing that can kill team cohesiveness quicker than the perception of you being unfair with certain individuals on the team. And, goals, they're either, the majority of them are short-term or tangible. Vision is long-term. It's less concrete. You kind of develop it along the way. And so you go back to setting your goals, and they are to some extent short-term. Most goals, if it's a specialized project team, it could be a 90-day goal. It could be a 60-day goal. I've been on teams where it's a 30-day goal. And you're talking about stress. If you get pulled into one of those teams where there's a 30-day time limit on it, it can get stressful in a hurry. But if you're looking at, it's your day-to-day, or if I looked at my day-to-day teams, they were typically annual goals. And, you want to stress those annual goals. And again, they were concrete and definitive. Whereas the strategy of maybe the department or strategy of a functional area, at least the long run strategy, it can be somewhat nebulous, somewhat, I don't know what it's called, squishy, but it's somewhat nebulous in that vision, that long run vision can change as you go forward out over the time horizon. And then one of the other things they talk about is dealing with the paradox of interdependence versus individuality. And again, we've talked about that in some of the early chapters. How do you handle when you can turn things over, when you can delegate? Do you want to be directive or consultative or facilitative or you want to be able to delegate? And it's, you want to be able to work collaboratively, but you want a team to show initiative. You want them to be creative. You don't want you don't want them to have the feeling that you are micromanaging them. You want to focus on those who excel, and you're going to end up with in groups versus out groups. I mean, I don't know any other way around it. It's and trust me, I've tried over the years. There's always going to be one or two that are going to fall in that out group. It's almost like it's human nature. It's almost like looking at the distribution, and you've got a normal distribution, you've got some up in the tails, and I've always had in all the teams I manage, you've got some rock stars up here on one end, and down on the other end, you've got that out group, that I don't know, they're just, again, it's almost like they suck the life out of you as a leader. But that's just part of being a leader, and it's part of, to me, it's part of human nature. And then you've got, you're starting to worry about cross-cultural issues, and they provide the example, I think, in the text. If you're looking at comparing Japanese environment versus the one in U.S., interdependence versus individual initiative, and individualism versus collectivism. Japanese culture needs more collectivism. U.S. is more individualism. You're trying to find ways for everyone to excel. You want everybody to be successful. You want everybody to be successful because if they are successful individually, then the team's going to be successful. If the team's successful, the department's successful. The department's successful, the corporation, the organization is going to be successful. So it kind of flows uphill, and that's your job as a man. It's your job as a leader to ensure that you're developing that human capital down here at the lower levels, and developing that human capital and motivating and mentoring people so that human capital and that expertise rises to the top. It's kind of like, they used to laugh about, cream rising to the top in a jug of milk. I mean, that's the way it does. Cream rises to the top. Cream's the best part of a jug of milk. And so you want to make sure that the cream of your team rises to the top. The size of a team drives the ability to focus on individual talents. And that is definitely true. If you've got a small team, say you've got a small team of a dozen people, it's easy to focus on them. My last team at Blue Cross was, I don't know, 100 individuals, give or take, depending on how many people were out on sick leave or something, or, disability. We had a heck of an issue in Buffalo with disability, but I had about 100 FTEs allocated to me, and you couldn't, even though you tried to get to know everybody on the team, it was difficult to manage them all together. And if you go back to your microeconomics classes, they talk, especially in the theory of the firm, they talk about economies of scale. So at a low output or low team numbers, you're extremely efficient at managing that team. And then the team numbers will build up to a level where there's some kind of constant returns to scale. And then it gets out here, and you'll get to a certain number of individuals on a team where you start seeing these diseconomies of scale. And it doesn't matter whether you're managing output and an operations or managing a team. To me, it's the same concept. The more individuals you have on the team, then you're starting to have to, you can't manage those large numbers of individuals. You're having to delegate. And if you're delegating to subordinates, so let's say you're a VP and you're delegating to directors, or directors delegating to a manager, you have to ensure that you as a leader select the best and the brightest to be in that next level of management, or it's like the kiss of death when it comes to managing a large team. And at this point, I'm going to stop right there. We're going to come back and talk about groupthink and the free rider issue. And they categorize it in the team and the text as team illnesses. So when we come back, we'll get into that, and we'll keep pushing forward in this chapter. Talk to you soon.